Mark it, please. Okay.
Well, I'd like to begin with Henry Ford joke you told me downstairs.
Well, 1930s, you know, all the people, especially working people, had a sense of humor about Henry Ford. Remembering Henry Ford would go around and give dimes out. This guy's a billionaire, and everybody, oh, this guy's something else. They all knew him as a miserable old man who only gave dimes out. But anyway, every place you went, some guys, let me tell you a story about Henry Ford. Go ahead, tell it. The guy said, well, you know, I got my hand going over here on the lever. I got my hand going on over there. I'm shaking my leg with a pedal over here. I got another pedal, so I'm going this way. Four things rolling all over. The guy said, put a broom up my ass, I'll sweep the floor for you. That was the connotation of work for Henry Ford, real speed up. And that's his introduction to America.
Can you tell me what New York City was like, particularly for you, in the early part of the Depression, before Roosevelt was inaugurated?
Well, for me, you gotta remember, I was always a militant kid, I was a rebel. But it was really a gray city, awful. I don't know, for some reason or other, I always was in turmoil. I was always fighting. I was looking to fight, to fight, to fight. But I would look around and I would see the Depression was an unbelievable story. It was so great that if you rode the subway, nobody would smile, nobody would talk, all their heads down. You got out of the subway station, the guy, man about 45 or 50, selling apples. All over the street, people selling apples, selling to each other. And that came through Herbert Hoover. They said, you could get out of the depression and buy an apple. There was no food in the 30s. Just unbelievable story again. You didn't visit people because you're afraid they didn't have the food to give you. So the depression in many ways was, I don't know, there were no jobs. And then we had a big wholesale job, was shoveling snow. And everybody would pray, let us snow, let us snow. Because if it snowed, you would be shoveling snow in the streets. Gave you 50 cents an hour, you got $4 a day. And everybody was looking for a snow job and looking for snow. Of course, you got paid a couple of months later, but that was the only work you ever did. And I remember the snow, I had one pair of shoes, and I only also had one pair of shoes. And one day, the little son came out, cleaning the snow. My shoes got wet. So I had to go to dance that night. I had a patent leather shoes, suede shoes. Nobody knew that these were wet from the daytime. We couldn't have another pair, or not one pair of shoes. I used that for everything, and that's how I went. I had suede shoes. They're wet shoes. I couldn't have no other shoes to wear.
So how did people survive there? No jobs, no food. How did people survive?
Well, you know, my mother we're 8 in a family and got a couple of pounds of macaroni, and we ate macaroni, and we ate macaroni. And we had one meatball. We had to divide it up. We really went around hungry. You had headaches from not eating. What the hell can I tell you? You were hungry. I remember, you know, going downtown and looking for jobs. I'd get 35 cents, 40 cents, and I'd buy a pretzel or two, 10 cents coffee, and buy a newspaper, and then you were broke. And listen, can you stop a minute?
Sure.
Where's a piece of paper I had with all those notes? Okay. Well, the other thing on the Great Depression, I forgot to mention that, my God, people jumping off roofs no matter what they did. People just lost their fortune, come to depression. And I remember at 23rd Street, Flatiron Building, walking along the street, and some guy jumps out of the window, splattered all his blood. Very common, by the way, of people committing suicide in the 30s. Just unbelievable what happened to so many people that the papers wouldn't even want to report it. In fact, they had a song, Gloomy Sunday, and it made people kill themselves. And finally, it wasn't allowed on the radio. Took it off the air, Gloomy Sundays. And it just, you know, made you so blue you couldn't stand it. And then the other thing I think people kind of forget, where is it, West Side Highway now and Riverside Drive. That was Hooverville, shanty town. They had old shanties along there. People got tins and boxes and they made it, and everybody lived along the waterfront. And the other thing you saw, if you went in the armies, big public buildings, lines of hundreds of people lined up waiting for a cup of coffee. So really the whole period was so depressing. You know, you went downtown and you looked, you saw a line, you know, unemployment, guys getting a cup of coffee. And anytime we got near a public building, people formed lines. There was a kind of unrest about it, There were, you know, the American people at that time, especially New York City, we were immigrants. We weren't quite sure, can we say anything against the city, the state? Remember, for European people to look at this government of theirs who have no social consciousness, they looked at the governments of the cities and Washington like they were like the kings, overpowering, so they didn't say anything. But you got this little radical group, they began to say, listen, we got to get some people, got to march to City Hall. I, through having a pair open, I've been fortunate, fortunate, that's why I am. I got in one of the early demonstrations, we marched to City Hall. We went there for jobs and welfare. We demanded jobs, we wanted welfare. So it was that was the whole thing of the 30s, you know. And
Can you tell me a little more about Hooverville? I mean, who was there? How many people were there? How people felt? How they lived?
oh my God, hundreds of people. 100 people along Riverside Drive. Now it's the West Side Highway. They got tins, cardboard boxes, and a whole batch of people lined up there. And they had community soup, they had big bowls of water, but maybe grab a can of tomato and throw it in. It was poverty land, and the paper didn't want to show it, you know. But every now and then they had to put it in because it's too obvious, too many people. And the whole West Side Highway was Hooverville, you know.
Who were these people? Were they immigrants? Were they blacks? Were they Puerto Ricans?
Mostly were working people in New York City, immigrants. No, yes, half and half. The young people are always reluctant to get into fighting mode because fighting against your government, they're kind of reluctant. But the European people who had some experience with governments and they knew you had the right to protest. But the younger people didn't have that. They didn't feel that way. That came on later on, being protested. So they didn't get on. And it was, I'm sure there were blacks, all kinds of people there.
Now, and this is the winter of 32, you have Hooverville, you have the bread lines, the soup lines and whatnot. The banks, Roosevelt closes the banks are still continuing to fail. Do you remember that, and did you lose or your family lose money in the bank?
No, most of them didn't have money in the bank, but I sure remember the shock. An awful shock. You went near these banks were out of business. I remember in my neighborhood, they had lines and lines up in the Bronx and in Manhattan, up in Soundview Avenue, they had the tremendous lines of people lost their money in the banks. Again, you know, the banks had a big effect on people, but you got to remember, not many working people had money in the banks. And if they did, they haven't taxed their madarat. They put the money in the mattress. They didn't trust banks anyway. What the hell are they going to do with banks? They don't know what a bank is. And that was part of, but that bank business frightened bank holidays. It frightened everybody.
Now, at that time, were you and your family and the people in your community really questioning the future of this country?
Well, my family did, and I think a bit of my mother.
I need for you to say my family did question, or my family had doubts about the future. You know, we got to include that.
Yeah. My family had doubts about the future, what was happening. My mother was a socially minded woman, and I, as a young kid, I'm the radical going downtown. I'm going to City Hall. I'm going to Union Square. I'm going looking for a job on an employment agency, or there was an agency for jobs on Lafayette Street. There were thousands of people there lining up trying to get into the office. They only could hold 2 people, 1,000 people outside. And all these guys already begin to agitate, guys making speeches, you know. And I'd come home and say, damn it, you know, I went down there, I heard the guy talk about unemployed contract join unions, and they were saying, we got to work short days and they got to provide jobs. My brothers and sisters looked at me and said, what the hell is this guy coming from? Because they lived in the Bronx. I was the cosmopolitan boy, I went downtown, took a subway. They stayed in the Bronx. They were a little provincial. So I came with all the radical ideas from New York City. What were radical ideas? Guys talking about what has to be done with America, what has to be done with the city. They went to Union Square, had 1,500 soapboxes. Everybody's making a speech. Hey, we're going to change the world. We got to do this. We got to do that. And this was an education for me. So where you got involved in people, and this also was the young people who had some schooling and knew a little about laws and rights of democracy, and they wanted things done. And they would get up in a box and explain different philosophies, from Karl Marx to Jesus Christ, and they talked about everything. All these young guys, very sharp, very bright, and they were saying, we can do something about this world of ours. You know, we can make the changes. But we have to understand, and they all said, man, one thing we know for sure, capitalism doesn't work. And they attacked capitalism.
Right. Yes, we are.
We have to change
that.
that. We have to change that.
Keep the mags over here, please. Marky, please.
Camera roll 10.
Ralph, you were going to tell me about FDR's inauguration, where you were, what you remember, how you felt.
Well, when Roosevelt got elected, Roosevelt came in. My God, it was the new day for us. All of us had this tremendous respect for Roosevelt. First of all, he gave first guy a little hope. You know, Roosevelt said the thing you have to be careful. You know, fear is the only thing you have to be. And we don't have any fear. We can do things. He had a regular slogan. I forget about the slogan about fear. And people begin to get up to the, you know, because Roosevelt came in and he painted a nice picture for America. We're going to get out of the Depression and we're going to live, and life isn't going to be so miserable and not so great. And then he started the NRA, and he started a lot of different things. But you know what was happening at the same time? The radicals were being organized, the left-wingers were being organized. Now they're pushing, and they're demanding things of Roosevelt, because at that time, he talked and he didn't deliver us that fast.
Okay, but tell me more about the inauguration, where you were, how you felt. Did you listen to it on the radio? Tell me a little bit more about
Oh, sure, I listened. I think I listened. You'd think I was there, but I listened to it, and I remember a guy was shot at that thing. The guy from Chicago, Mayor Sumke. He was killed at that thing in Washington. And they had all these photographs of Roosevelt coming there. And, you know, everybody looked at those pictures, like the World Series, something new. You know, this president guy didn't, because they couldn't stand Hoover. They hated Hoover. Oh, the words that came out of people about Hoover make your hair turn upside down.
Okay, let's stop for a minute.
Okay, so cut.
Now,
Wrong speeding. Okay.
Take 5.
Marky, please.
Take 5.
Marky, please.
you were talking about FDR's inauguration.
Well, when Roosevelt was elected, like a new day came, everybody thought God has arrived. Especially people over 50 and 60. You know, they're getting on in years, and they just saw this man as the savior, going to save their lives. I think his talk sounded like they were receiving communion. They all listened to him. In fact, I'll tell you what it was like. When Roosevelt was going to speak on the radio later on, everybody went, oh, listen, we got to listen to Roosevelt, we got to listen to the president. Like going to see the World Series game, we got to listen to a fight. Everybody went home and started to listen to Roosevelt, because Roosevelt, you know, he was this inspired man. He kind of knew history, and he kind of worked on people, so he was able to put out and give the American people a kind of way out, and they were looking for, because the days of Hooverville, the gray days and awful days and demonstration, you never got a damn thing out of Hoover. When Roosevelt came in, it was like got a shot in the arm. It was a wonderful feeling that new president came in.
Now, we talked about this a little bit, but tell me more about this banking crisis and people were actually
Well, I mean, the banking crisis. I was in a neighborhood up around in the East Bronx, and when a bank went out of business there, they had lines blocks long. And everybody was frightened about the banks, and they had these lines and lines and lines. I think when they come to think of the 30s, were lines of welfare people, lines of demonstration, lines of banks, all kinds of lines. It was a kind of a strange period in American history. I would like to do some, well, I did something, and I'd like to do more about it because I'm always, well, I was trying to tell people, let's not forget yesterday.
Now, you talked about it a little bit more, but we were talking about his inauguration speech. But the fireside chats. Tell me more about that. Before you told me that it was like this guy who comes right into your living room or right into your kitchen like he's just sitting there talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that, how you felt, and kind of repeat that story for me.
Well, I like what he was saying, but remember, I began to be a radical. I've been thinking about capitalism, socialism, so I was a little different than the rest of the guy. I was saying, can this guy deliver? Can he deliver? Can he deliver? I began to question Roosevelt. I was a questioning type. Like most young people, always questioning, what's he going to do? He's not a politician, not a politician. Young people, they're always cynical, and they want answers immediately. The old people were waiting for a handout. They say, thank God this guy came about. And you felt that this guy came, he was going to save the people. And a tremendous feeling for him. Oh, the elderly people, they could kiss his toenails. That's how much they loved this guy. He grabbed a certain amount of respect. And when Roosevelt spoke, you felt this monumental guy speaking. He taught my friends, like he's talking to you. He made you understand. He made contact with the human race, and they loved him for that because Hoover didn't know how to talk to people. In fact, most politicians didn't know how to talk to people. Roosevelt, in a way, was a boy one that I came into politics, and I never heard a guy talk like that. Where the hell this guy's coming from?
So he used radio and better or different than it had ever been used before?
Oh, he made use of it. Yeah. He really tapped radio for it, and he had these fireside chats. I told everybody, nobody was on the streets that night. Everybody running away. Oh, I got to go to this guy. Roosevelt's going. Got to need a president. Got to need a president. Amazing how this guy caught the imagination of the American people.
Now he gets into office and he begins direct relief, which is different from what Hoover did. Hoover didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So how do people feel about this direct relief?
Well, they wanted a relief. They wanted food cans, a lot of other things. But then there was another group, no, they want jobs. So the concern came, they wanted jobs. They didn't buy Roosevelt for relief. They didn't want canned food. They didn't want stamps. They wanted jobs. And I think they forced Roosevelt to the position. He had to reconsider what he had to do. And I think he began to start the WPA Works Administration, Project Administration. And now you begin to see building of the roads, building of the streets, clearing up the waterfronts. Started a project up in Harlem called LaGuardia Housing, Start to repair all the highways and byways and major streets in America.
Okay, so it wasn't really the WPA, it was really the PWA and CWA first. WPA was like a little later, and we have to be careful to get these things in the right order chronologically as we tell this history. But his jobs programs, the CWA and the PWA, people actually started getting jobs. Do you remember people that got these jobs and how they felt, and did they talk about it?
Oh, sure. They all had jobs. But I think, they're making jobs within jobs. It's like you went to an unemployment office and you were signing for, well, then you went there to apply for a job, and people got jobs at these agencies. And it was only when they got into construction that his program had some effect. Now, they had a couple of housing projects they started on. I think the Lower East Side, then in Harlem. And then they start fixing bridges. I think later on they start doing the Triborough Bridge with the big thing. And then I think they went to Westchester County and began to build, I guess you ride through Hutchins River Parkway. You see all the beautiful masonry, the work that the Italians were building the roads, and they set the stone. And it was, you know, they were, for the first time, they were given recognition for the skill they had. And in a way, he was also, man was going to work, you know, he came out in 1929, this is 1932, 3 years later. Through the Roosevelt administration, man went to work, he began to get recognition of himself, he began to feel better inwardly. So he could walk up, he wasn't stooped. Before he was stooped down, and he walked around and he was really depressed. And Roosevelt gave these guys a new set of hopes, and that kind of changed the ball game a bit. But also at that same time, you got to remember, a people's movement is beginning to emerge here. People checking up, saying, listen, what do we got to do? And some people came to Europe, had some ideas that you can start movements. And the movements begin to develop. The employed consuls. And every neighborhood you went where the, if a people were kicked out of the house because they didn't pay rent, they had 10, 15 people pick up the furniture and bring it right back. I used to work with a black guy. He said, Ralph, he said, got to remember, every time these people came in, took our furniture out, we had 20 people to bring the furniture in. So we didn't worry about them. They did their job. The marshal came, he said, with this paper. And 5 minutes later, everybody from the street carried the furniture to the house, right into the house. And they never failed, you know, because now the people are getting militant. And this begins to be a new trend in America, militancy. And the people begin to accept it in a way. They begin to fight, they come back. See, the hope that Roosevelt gave, that there's a sun, the world's going to be there. But there's emerging left, these radicals, all different groups, begin to march up and demand different things. And this was the beginning of movements.
Now, you said that there was this black guy that you worked with.
About ready to roll out.
Okay. What kind of work were you doing?
Take 6.
Okay, I'll call it. Oh, you're already slated it voice-wise, right, Felipe?
Yes.
Okay, second sticks. Hit it again. Open it up and hit it again.
Take 6.
Go ahead.
Hit the stick.
Mark it. Thank you.
Now, we were talking about FDR. He gets into the office, and one of the first things he does is the NRA. Do you remember the NRA?
Oh, National Recovery Act. Sure, remember that.
Tell me about that.
And he had a fellow by the name of Johnson, head of it. The general took him out of the army, made him there. The National Recovery Act was trying to regulate prices and wages, I believe, and it made a lot of noise. But I think that it didn't favor the small guy. The big guys began to take the cream, a lot of criticism, and I think they had to drop the NRA. But it hung around for a couple of years. It had to go illegal, no matter where you saw NRA. And it didn't work. It didn't deliver. And people began to get a little cynical about it. And they saw the usual stuff. The high guys were grabbing part of the action, and they left nothing for the people at the bottom. So that petered out, and they begin to attack. Johnson was his name, Gerald Johnson. Kind of called him a little dictator fascist. Who's this guy coming around here telling us what to do?
Now, but at the beginning,
Yeah.
when they had the large parade in New York, the largest parade in New York City history, you know, the flag, the eagle, and people are marching. Do you remember the parade? And if so, do you remember how people felt about the NRA at the beginning?
Well, remember when Roosevelt came in, it was a new day. Everything at Roosevelt, it was monumental. There wasn't.
Let me stop for a second.
Take 7.
Mark it. Okay.
Ralph, you were going to tell me about the NRA and
Well, you know, the NRA was like the repeal of beer. Everybody had to sign NRA, 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 and it has a big parade, and they covered an awful lot of every newspaper, you know, had a big slogan, NRA, and the world was going to be better. And it made a lot of noise, and everybody got all the department stores and all the windows and all the factories had these signs. They had labels, NRA, International Carry Act. It was part of the thing that Roosevelt was instilling in American people some hope. It was big an opening. They thought the guy was trying something, and a lot of people had a lot of respect for him. And I think the thing that the wisest people were the militants. They said, now wait a while, we go along, but let's build our own organization. So they begin to do things, and they begin to be critical, not much of Roosevelt, of Johnson. They didn't want to attack Roosevelt. He was too popular to attack, you know. And so they used Johnson at the NRA and saying, this guy's taking care of the bosses. And Johnson was an army man. He said things in an army way. He didn't understand people. Remember, the Army in this country never reflected democratic feeling. Nobody liked the Army. In fact, the guys who went in the Army were considered bums. And on the other hand, the Army people knew that the Army had nothing to do with common folks. They didn't buy that story about the Army.
Now, in 32, when Roosevelt wins, LaGuardia loses. Congressman LaGuardia. Were people upset by his loss? I mean, people from your community?
Oh, sure. You know, LaGuardia, I think, lost by a fluke accident. He ran on a Republican ticket, and a fellow by the name of Lanzetti ran on a Democratic ticket. He just wanted to come out to...
Can you start it from the beginning and look at Dante?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, LaGuardia lost by a fluke. He ran as a Republican, and a guy ran on a Democratic ticket, a fellow by the name of Lanzetti. And he took LaGuardia's place. In fact, the Italians used to make some joke. They used to have all stories about this mopey Lanzetti. How the hell did he get in? And he got in his landslide. It had nothing to do with the Roosevelt administration. Had no thinking. He was a politician that didn't make sense. And the people realized, and they felt sorry that they lost LaGuardia. And most people talked about it. LaGuardia began to build a reputation, not only as an Italian, but as a fighter. That's what LaGuardia was known for. He was a fighter. And people like fighters, you know. And like Roosevelt came up with a courageous man. He was a fighter. He was going to take on the big banks and big industries and going to give the people a break. And so, you know, that's the feeling they had. And I had the same feeling, too, you know, that expressing, you know, fighting is a way to get things done.
Now, LaGuardia fought Tammany for years and years as a congressman and after he became mayor also. How did you and your community feel about Tammany?
Well, we knew they were the bosses, and we knew they could fix a ticket for you, or if your kids got in jail, or came Thanksgiving or Christmas, they gave you a sack of potatoes. But those were the contempt underneath them. And the only guy that took on Tammany Hall was LaGuardia. And LaGuardia had a little pitchy voice. Listen, I'm going to get you guys. Who the heck you think you are anyway? And everybody liked LaGuardia because he's taking on a politician, and he'd get up on the air and he'd say, I get you guy, you Tammany Hall politician. You're not going to be the Ward Hill. You're not going to run this city. We're going to run the city. The people are going to run the city. And Mark was a little fighter. You know, he was a guy, a little short guy, would come up there and talk, and then he got away with working people. They loved him, too, because he had a sense of humor. And every now and then he'd throw a word on Italian, every now and then throw a word in Jewish, and he understood Tammany Hall, the Irish politician. If anybody was hated in New York City at that time, it was Tammany Hall. You know, Tammany Hall, if you had a grocery store, the cop would come in and take this. If you had a peddler's store, he'd take an apple. You go into a restaurant, they'd eat for nothing. Arrogant, arrogant, arrogant. They pushed the people around at a goddamn stick, all it was. Stick, stick, stick. It was LaGuardia eliminated the police stick. It was LaGuardia brought black people out. The city force. A new day was coming to New York City. You felt that way. You know, a wonderful feeling of LaGuardia. And then, you know, he was a guy that got on the air and would tell a little story with the funny sheets. And he was a guy, remember, LaGuardia was a cultured guy. You know, he knew what politics was about. He understood social movements. He understood social and community. He knew what Russia was. The average politician in Tammany Hall was a guy from the block. He took care of numbers and he killed petty grievances. And he helped you out in a petty way. But LaGuardia began to give some significance as being a mayor. The intellect now is beginning to arrive, which later on Roosevelt hired the Brain Trust. Now you begin to find out people who run the city are people of culture, who have a worldview and understand what this world's all about.
What did it mean to you, the fact that LaGuardia was an Italian and an immigrant, and he won as mayor?
Well, you gotta remember, I liked him as an Italian, you know, you gotta be proud of that. But I think what we liked most about him was that he was ready to take a machine on, he was a fighter. And that impressed everybody. Because remember, the people at that time were called downtrodden. They had no leads, they had no hope. So you had two new guys come into the picture, Roosevelt and LaGuardia. And they stayed with America for a long, long time. The image of Roosevelt and the image of LaGuardia. In fact, you know, the only way they downgraded these two guys, the right-wingers, or maybe you can call them fascists, whatever they were, began to downgrade Roosevelt and LaGuardia. The opposition was being formed. But so many positive things came out of these two people, you couldn't down them, that's all.
When he won as mayor, did that make you feel like included or part of the American political process?
It was the beginning of it. You know, because I think when LaGuardia got elected, you begin to think in terms of farm labor. You begin thinking, you remember the congressman would raise questions about American people, unemployment insurance. He wanted things for people. He was a socially minded guy in the House. Now when he came into the city, now you thought the city was going to be resolved. Because you got to remember, New York City was run out of Tammany Hall, and all the clubs had all the power. If you wanted something done, you had to go to the club. And you had guys standing on the corner that worked for Tammany Hall. You gave them a grievance, so you know you had to have something wrong with the apartment, the water wasn't running, they had no heat. You went to see the guy in the club, and the guy in the club must talk to the landlord, and then he'd resolve your problems. So this was a beginning that LaGuardia began to eliminate, put the inspectors on, you know, and had the inspectors watching the grocery stores and the food markets weren't harassed by the police. Always grafting you, always glomming you, taking things, and they were the wise guys. They were the wise guys, you know.
And these are basically, Tammany is basically Irish.
Yeah. Oh my God, you know, the business of the Irish running the city was unbelievable. That I think the Italians, they became.
You have to change again. But that's what we want to pick up.
Take 8.
Hit it. Thank you.
Ralph, you were going to tell me about the Irish control of Tammany and the city of New York.
Well, you know, the facts of life is that the Italian people, because Tammany Hall was the police department, were, of course, they were the state, the oppressor. And all the Italians, you know, he'd never be anti-something, but he'd be anti-Irish. Because the Irish had all the jobs, they controlled the city, they spoke the language. And not only the Italians, all the other nationalities, like the Jewish people, disliked them. Because no matter where you went, you called about an Irish cop. In fact, you had a little song, Irish prick, Irish Mick. And they always talked about the Irish. In fact, when I was a kid, I lived in the village. Kids would go up on the roof and throw cement sacks on the Irish cops. And this guy standing on a corner, you see it pass by, you whack your ass with a stick. when you saw the cop come out at night, he said, "Get the hell out of here, go home." They were really patrolling the streets. While they were patrolling the street, they were on a take. They were taking, always taking. Oh, the graph was unbelievable. They just took from everybody. In fact, some of the speakeasy days, when the speakeasy went out of business because the police department, everybody went in. He said, I can't afford to pay every cop $20, $20, $20, $20. They went out of business. You know, many of the speakeasies, if they did go broke, it was due to the police department knocked them broke, and the state government, mostly it was the local politics, knocked them broke.
Now, all of this changed when LaGuardia won.
Oh, that was the end of that business. Yeah, LaGuardia brought in a new day. I think in fact, he got a more of a feeling like, even different than Roosevelt, because LaGuardia, a lot of people worked for LaGuardia, a lot of people knew the club leaders, a lot of people came from Harlem. They came from Democratic clubs. They knew what was going on. They knew the leader. And now LaGuardia was the clubs are being fed out of City Hall by LaGuardia. Not graft, but you got it out of LaGuardia, you got things done. And tickets and small-time petty guys, number men. They didn't all stop with LaGuardia. Remember, you know, the gamblers and the wise guys, Mark, LaGuardia, I'm going to get rid of the wise guys. But you know something? He didn't get rid of the wise guys because they're part of the society. You can't have a society without having gangsters. It's a corrupt society, so the gangsters stayed there. They jumped on the road, they know how to get out of the way. And they weren't going to let LaGuardia knock them out of the ball game. They cleaned it up a bit. You don't think the wise guys or the hoods are going to let any mayor get out of the way. They're very shrewd, they maneuvered. But he would make these great speeches, and everybody loved him for that. You know, I'm going to take these Irishmen on this Tammany Hall group. He would make all, hey, you guys. Well, he didn't sound Italian, but they loved him because he said that. You know, it was a great thing to hear a guy taking on this big hulk of Tammany Hall machine that's been in business for hundreds of years. Unbelievable.
Now, do you remember him fighting the gangsters and smashing the
slot machine? Yeah, well, he was also a great actor. You know, Little Flower was a really great actor. He did a lot of things, and, well, he was great. He was publicity, did nice things, and he kind of had well, you know, they gave him the name, the Little Flower. LaGuardia was a guy of the people. The little guy came in and did things, and he had a sense he knew how to handle the politics. He wasn't dogmatic. He wasn't playing the dictator of New York City. He was expressing the opinion of a lot of small people, and they liked him for that reason, you know. And
tell me about the slot machines. I need to have you.
well, you know, these slot machines were run by the gangsters. Not a lot of petty gangsters, and they had these things all over. You play this machine, you put a nickel and dime in, a quarter, and you got your money. And every now and then, LaGuardia would grab about 20 slot machines. Daily News would come there and take pictures, and they'd have LaGuardia with an axe, breaking the machines down, you know. Of course, next day the machines were back in the same store. Don't worry about it. They took away on a Monday, the newspaper came, they're all back. And this is the way it works. If you think they're going to eliminate speakeasies and a slot machine, you're eliminating your head. You got to know how this thing works. And you got to be able to be philosophical about it. You can't be idealistic about it. You can't say, oh, we got to get rid of the racketeer, you know. Just because people look at it, who's this idealistic, stupid man, you know.
But now, he was also in favor of and fought for the repeal of Prohibition.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, you know, those days we had speakeasies all over. Speakeasy, the word comes when they go into place, don't make too much noise. Speakeasy, speak low. And they got this label, speakeasy. And everybody knew where a speakeasy was. Always saw a curtain in front of the store and blank, no name. And these were the speakeasy. You went in and you got home brew, you got beer. Every now and then, prohibition agent would come and raid the place. That's because I guess the guy didn't pay a graft, because usually these places were covered. Everything was covered. You know, the laws are made for these politicians to make money and take care of the wise guys. Every neighborhood had a speakeasy. You went in there. We had a couple in my neighborhood. And they had home brew in this one. They didn't have tap beer. And you went there, and I forget about the 35 cents. You had frankfurters and nice rye bread and the cheeses and all that kind of business. And a lot of working men came 12 o'clock, would pull their trucks up on the side and go with the speakeasy. And it was the people's club in a way.
Now, Roosevelt starts his PWA and CWA programs and whatnot, but everyone didn't get jobs, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in many instances, black people. Can you tell me about that? Do you know anyone that got these jobs and so forth?
I know people got a WPA, but I got to tell you, I think I said it before, that the New York City people were isolated from the blacks. The blacks lived in Harlem. And the Lexington Avenue line cut off and went to Harlem, didn't go any other place. And the people in the Bronx, and I think in Brooklyn too, and Lower Manhattan, didn't know the black people. Now, you did find some black people operating an elevator in a building, which also was the so-called lowest job, but it was a job we didn't understand it. Later on, white guys went for the job. So in many of the buildings you went into, the elevator with a piece of cable up and down. That was my first. Well, I had a touch in reform school. I met some black kids in my neighborhood. I gotta tell you, I gotta talk about in my neighborhood. I was out of reform school. And I brought a kid in the neighborhood, and they used to call me. We had a little team in the neighborhood. We brought this guy, Jennings. He was a pitcher. Everybody said, geez, they got that team with the black guy. He's something else. He was so good in the 1930s. I met him later on. I said, how the hell come you're not playing a big league? He said, hey, stupid. Don't you know I'm black? I didn't know that he weren't allowed to play. You know, I know me. But he came in my neighborhood, 1926, 1927, stayed at my house. Unheard of. Unheard of a black guy in the white neighborhood. This 1926, 1927, but he stayed with us. But later on, he said, look, I can't play, I'm too good. He went up to McCombs Park and played with the black teams up in Harlem and on 55th Street in that area. But the blacks at that time, you know, it was only through CIO and the Workers' Alliance that the blacks got a space in America. And the left wing that brought the blacks into the picture of America. You didn't get it out of the movements that were around. Now, LaGuardia knew something about the blacks. He was understanding of the blacks. I think he was a friend of the guy. I forget the guy's name. Not head of the. No, not Phillips. There was another guy, Crosswaite or something. Well, even before Randolph, there was another guy that LaGuardia knew. LaGuardia, remember, was a socially minded person, so he knew the word Negro, which not many people didn't know. You know, they call them blacks and niggas, all that kind of garbage. LaGuardia was a very cultured guy, you know. Remember, LaGuardia was one of the few mayors in America where a cultured man understood different problems, knew what Puerto Ricans were.
So then, did things change for black New Yorkers when LaGuardia became mayor?
Oh, sure. The first thing, the police department, you found black cops. And especially in Harlem, the white cops would use that goddamn stick all day, and they would give a special order to take your stick away. So in a way, the black people saw something in LaGuardia. And I think, I believe he was liked by the black people. Now, I remember when the riots took place in Harlem and Connecticut. Now, we walked into it. We were socially minded kids. And for some reason or other, you know, they understand people. They looked at us and said, these kids are all right. They know us. Well, that's because we had an understanding. Remember, I began to go into demonstrations. Downtown, we saw blacks in the demonstrations. And the CIO opened up another new world to the American people. It opened up the Amalgamated. It opened up the ISDW. It began to flourish. And breath of fresh air is now coming into America and taking place in the city. Jobs.
We're out again.
9.
Mark it.
Ralph, in the pre-interview, you talked to me about racism and discrimination in some of these New Deal programs. Can you talk to me about that now? In particular, the fact that you had to know someone to get one of these jobs?
Yeah, you know, I think in any, no matter where you go, while you're reading the paper, you know, the jobs are open, but, you know, you got to go through the clubs. The clubs still had control. And it seems that way then and now, too. What you read in the papers always makes a good story, but you have to go meet the right people who'll give you a card or tell you go and see so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Then you get your job. Now, the only thing that I knew, like a lot of us knew, you know, the only thing that I knew in the 30s, to be honest about you, we heard about the Ubangi Club. You heard about the jazz club. You heard about the music that was going on.
Okay. We'll
Start that again.
that's okay. We'll just press on and talk about something else.
I'm sorry. The reason I did that was trying to get you to have eye contact with Dante.
Oh, I see. All right. Okay.
One of your most famous paintings is the painting of the Triborough Bridge.
Uh-huh.
Tell me what you felt and why you made that painting.
Well, the painting of New York City. Geez, I walked the city all over. I lived it. I drove it. Through the Depression, and then when I had a buck. And I kind of know New York City pretty well. I had the fortune as my wife, but to be poor. And being poor, you walk all over and you're searching all over. I got involved in all the boroughs, the 5 boroughs. No, I didn't. Staten Island, I didn't know, and Queens a bit. But Brooklyn, Manhattan, and the Bronx, I knew very well. And I think because of being on an ice route and driving trucks and living in different boroughs, mainly because my father and I spent a both the neighborhoods would learn me how to zoom in on apartment houses and buildings and people. And then driving a truck gave me an overall view of the city, in which I had to go over the 59th Street Bridge, and I had to go over the Triborough Bridge, over Brooklyn Bridge. So I was a kid that saw a lot of things. And I was a kid with an eye that looked at things. I don't know why, that's what it was. And when my father took me on a horse and wagon way back in 1920 or 1922, put me on top of he used to pick up waste paper. And I would go with him and I would see different people. And then he had a route in Brooklyn, he brought me in contact with the Jewish people. And then in a Catholic textbook, I got involved with this young boy. We were young kids, Howard Jennings. And while I was in the Catholic textbook, I saw black ball players, Lincoln Giants, Bacharach Giants, Homestead Grays. I saw all these guys play. And then I got up in different areas, up in the Bronx. I saw Italian people, different neighborhoods. I'm trying to tell you what makes me paint, how I can paint a painting like New York City. It's a very complex painting. But if you stand near that painting, let alone you breathe air in it, because it breathes, I could take it to a Puerto Rican neighborhood, Italian neighborhood, Irish neighborhood, black neighborhood. And all these neighborhoods, you can feel these people, because I've been through these places, and I only paint what I can feel. And I've been through all the neighborhoods, and now I've been through Harlem, East Harlem, West Harlem. In fact, I delivered meat in West Harlem. And I'm giving you a story of how bad the world was, just we're talking about depression. When we drove a truck through Harlem, we had to look in the store window because they were going to steal meat. You know, we're a hungry world. I think we constantly forget where we came out of. People were hungry. Not only the blacks were hungry, everybody was hungry. And so when deliver the truck no matter where you were. You had to watch out because some guy's going to steal the meat, steal the groceries. And I remember a story one time of a cop up in the Bronx. He pinched the guy. The guy broke into a store. The guy said, "Listen, hey man, I got 6 kids. I got to feed them." The cop said, "Bring me to your house." The guy went there. He had 6 kids. Get the hell! I'm not gonna make a pinch. So you found the hunger. Unbelievable story. I lived in the 1930s in Williamsbridge, in a couple of streets there, mixed neighborhood. Jesus Christ Almighty! I'll tell you that. On this particular street, I met a guy the other day, 218th Street, blacks and whites lived on this one block. And you know, they were so together. Why? Because they lived in poverty. They played baseball, football. But poverty brings people together. Struggle really brings people together. When you get struggled, you don't see color, you don't see race. You get together, you do. And that's why I have a lot of my pain. Lest we forget, and that's why I was the guy, what's the struggle? If you have struggle, something good comes out of it. I think this is what we're always talking about. 2 things I talk about. Lest we forget, and we got to struggle. My father had a different saying. He used to say, "Listen, son, got to own up your ass. You got to sweat. I'm an immigrant. I got to sweat. I got 6 kids, and every day I got to get up and work this fucking horse and wagon. And an Irish cop comes along and gives me a ticket. What do you think of that Irish son of a bitch? He gives me a ticket. This is what it's all about." So the immigrant is being oppressed by the state apparatus, which is the Irish. He can't speak the goddamn language. My mother walks into a shop. She's a buttonhole maker. So she brings in union talk to me. And then through the unions, beginning the socialist talk. The unfortunate thing about Italian immigrant, the word social was foreign to them. But the whole question of CO in the times of history gave me an eye-opener, gave me a worldview. And since then, I'm in trouble, but I keep looking all over this world, and without this worldview, you're lost. The world becomes monotonous. And that's why it's nice to, when I look at some of the programs and see certain things going on, I get all excited. I think the thing that, what I got out of this country of mine, it is my country, I came out of a tremendous feeling for jazz, and I got it out of that goddamn music. And in baseball and organizing. This is my life. And that's why I paint New York. That's why a guy offered me one time $400,000 in Boston. He said, "Listen, Ralph," he said, "you paint in New York City. Come paint Boston, 400. I give you 400,000. I make 100. We can make $500,000. We can sell you prints." I say, "No, something. I'd like to come to Boston, but I spent 50 years in New York City. That's why I'm able to paint. I can't come 2 weeks and paint Boston. What do you think I am? It doesn't work."
Let me ask you one more question about recording. How much we got?
Oh, let's stop a second. Let's change batteries.
Take 10.
Mark it. Okay.
In the 1932 laughing stories, one was the guy that ran for mayor, O'Brien. And everybody knew he was a muddlehead. He was just the wrong guy to run for being the mayor. And every time the mayor was interviewed.
Begin again and tell me 1933 is when the election was.
In 1933, when they ran, a guy by the name of O'Brien ran for Tammany Hall, and he just was a 210 hitter. He was a fumbler. And everybody made jokes about this Mopey, who was the mayor of New York City. He was taught the same way the Brooklyn Dodgers were. The Dodgers were called the bums. Everybody talked about the Dodgers. They didn't know how to catch the ball. Babe Herman would run the wrong way, and they would drop this game and that game. So you had 2 laughing jokes in New York City. One was the Brooklyn Dodger bums, and one was this mayor that ran. And everybody laughed. It was a joke, you know, the humor that you got to live with this world of ours. So it was kind of fun. And then they had this other guy, that McKee. He was a new saint. Honest Joe McKee, I think they called him. He took Mayor Walker's position. Mayor Walker was a dapper young guy, and by the way, I got this going to City Hall these days. He had a little door on the side, and he came out through the back. He went in for the front. He had a little apartment downstairs where he had a little bottle of whiskey, he had a chick, he had a bar room, he had everything for himself. That was the mayor. He had the room downstairs. Nobody knew he was going out to the back door. But he was a dapper guy, very sharp guy, very bright. Of course, I liked the mayor. I know he was a crook, but he did something for Tom Mooney. He helped out Tom Mooney, a labor guy from the West Coast. He made an appeal. He helped Tom Mooney's mother. Mother Mooney, she's a wonderful woman, you know. And then LaGuardia got into the picture, and LaGuardia, he topped it off because LaGuardia came in and said, I'm going to get rid of these politicians. You know, we're not going to have this wise guy, Mayor Walker, you know, and all these politicians. So he, you know, the whole thing, with all this crudeness and coldness, people went to parties, they did a takeoff on the mayor, they did a takeoff on O'Brien, and McKee, the honest. I think they had a label, Honest Key, made it key that he was the honest mayor. He was a forgotten nice guy, like some Lindsay. But that was, I think those were the standing jokes of the 1930s, the little humor that we were able to put in this Great Depression. And the Great Depression was really a Great Depression, but out of it came a wonderful CIO, and America got singing for many, many years after that. So, you know, out of the bad, something good came.
Can you tell me what's LaGuardia's legacy?
Okay.
We're out.
Yes.
Okay, that's okay. I think we have a.
Lock it.
Take one.
Well, you know, through Roosevelt, we put in the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act made it illegal for us to organize, Section 7A something. So when you went to a plant that I worked as an organizer, then we'd say, you know, we got this law over here, the Wagner Act giving us the legal right to organize. And the employer had to deal with us collectively. And we got a group of people, we got the majority of people voted. You had to sit down and sign a contract. And now we found, for the first time in history, the working people getting okay when it comes to organize. Before, you had to sweat it out. There was no labor laws. But besides that,
Stop a second. I can see it. Right.
Take two.
Okay.
well, the fact that the Wagner Act came through the government, which I think was Section 7A, it gave the right to work to organize into a union, and the bosses had to deal with us. If we got the majority of the people, they voted, or we had the cards, we went in, and all the employees had to sit down with you and deal with them. We'd sign a contract. This is for the first time the American people thought the government was on their side. There's never been an agency that said you could do the right to organize, because you organize on your own before. There were no agencies, no government, there were no laws in America concerning labor other than the 8-hour day, some law, health law, not labor laws. So in a way, this gave the American worker the right to organize. It opened the doors for us. But as I knew a guy we organized in the 1930s, he'd say, listen, he said, you know, you got the Wagner Act here, you got Roosevelt on your side, but you know who's going to organize the plant? You. Remember, the laws that they have, but you got to organize. You got to get off your, you know, and get going. And that's the way you had to organize.
How did you feel about John L. Lewis, and do you remember him on the radio?
Oh, my God. John Lewis is my God. There are two people, John L. Lewis and FDR on Fieldside to shake their hands. Both times I was in their company. I was overwhelmed by both of them because those are my heroes. I got about 4 or 5 heroes. John L. Lewis, Roosevelt, Harry Bridges, and King. Maybe another guy or two, but these are my heroes. Roosevelt, John Lewis, King, Harry Bridges, I can say Mark and Tony. I got 5 heroes. These 5 heroes sustained my life. Without any heroes with integrity and a pair of balls, I'd never make this world, because you got to have that. If you have that courage, you make the world. If you have no courage, you're a dropout.
Do you remember hearing John L. Lewis speak on the radio?
Oh, I heard John Lewis a lawful time. I liked him. He was a guy that, you know, he got up to you and he told you off. You know, John Lewis, and during wartime, pulled the miners on that strike. I think the most respected labor leader in this country is John L. Lewis. You go to a coal mine all over America, and that Lewis, he took the government down. He fought Roosevelt. He was afraid of nobody. People in America like fighters, and all over the world they love fighters. And Lewis was a fighter. You know, when Lewis got involved in the auto workers strike, and what's his name again?
Hang on, let's wait till the plane goes by.
Mark it, please.
Take 3.
Okay.
When the auto workers went on strike and had sit-downs in Detroit, and the mayor, the governor of Detroit was, geez, I just blanked out. I had his name right in front of me. What's his name? Murphy, that's it. Murphy was the governor, and he was going to pull the troops in. You know, going to take the sit-down out, the workers in the plant. And John L. Lewis went to see him at the hotel. Listen, you, Murphy, don't you know what's going on, this capitalist system? This capitalist system, I'm not mistaken, the British kill your grandfather. Hey, man, you're not going to do this. Who are you? You got to remember who you are. There's a working class there. And the working class wasn't taken care of by the British Empire, okay? And that was a great thing Lewis did. He saved the miners.
How did you guys feel about the American Federation of Labor?
Well, they were fat cats. It was CIO, the militant organization, went out and organized. And remember that the AFL came out of the craft union. They came out of a deal of two gumpers. You know, you do a good day's work and to get a good day's pay. They never told the worker you can never beat the capitalist system as long as they run the shops. So we, from where I'm coming from, we used to call the AFL class collaborators. That makes sense for you in this program? And the CIO, while they didn't believe in socialism, they fought for the workers' rights. And they broke the big, you know, they broke Ford, they broke General Motors, Chrysler. They were taking on the big wheels. And they took on the big newspapers. They took everybody on. So the CIO was really got into mass industries. The AFL, they're organized since God knows when, and they sat on their fannies, and the CIO came along and became a militant organization. Did a fabulous job.
Do you remember hearing about the Memorial Day Massacre in Chicago?
I sure did, but you know, I was in Spain then, as a young kid. I was a member of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and I got some photographs of it. In fact, I'm thinking of trying to make a painting of that scene.
What was the role of the Communist Party in the CIO in the 1930s?
Well, the role of the Communist Party in 1930 played a big role. They were the Jimmy Higgins. They were the ones that went to a plant where nobody would go. They gave the leaflets out. They knocked the doors. They were the ones that made approach to the black people, talked to the black people, talked to the minority people, talked to the Czech people. The Communist Party, in a way, was an immigrant party at that time. It talked all the immigrants. So when the CIO began to form throughout the country, the immigrant Americans, the immigrant people in America, had attachment to the insurance company, the Fraternal Outlook. And they had branches all over the country. They had a branch of the Italians, the Jews, the blacks, the whites, the Italians, the Greeks, all groups. So when the CIO began to organize, they went to the IWO and the Communist Party and said, look, we know the guy in this town, this apartment, this house, that house. It was, you know, the beginning, the formation came out of the Communist Party CIO. They had, had the organization, the Trade Union, Liberty League, let's see, Trade Union, Unity League, which was an arm of the Communist Party. And they were organizing, of course they were accused of being dualism, but yet they did it. And John Lewis would hire anybody. Don't tell John Lewis you're a communist. You know you're a communist, but don't tell him that. He'd hire, he'd go and organize. And the ones that did the organizing, were the great organizers in that period, were the communists. They carried the ball.
Some people say that the Communist Party in this country was controlled by orders from Moscow. How do you feel about that?
No, they were influenced. They looked at the Mother Church was Russia, but it wasn't controlled by them. They were sharp enough. A guy like Foster, a lot of guys understood. Were they dogmatic? Oh yeah, but the communists, the Russians had their own headaches. But there were sharper guys in the CIO know what to do. I say they did a big job. They made a lot of blunders, but what the hell? Out of blunder, they built the moon, 3 million people. That wasn't too bad.
Final question. Why did labor activists join the Communist Party?
Why did labor activists join the Communist Party? Well, the Communist Party had a philosophy about surplus profit. Taught you the economic game. Remember that we live in a world of economics. We call it the free market. We're talking about economics. How do you understand this thing? How come you worked for 40 years in a shop, you come out, you're broke? And how come, you don't have insurance? You don't have many things. And the Communist Party, through its teaching, the schools it had, it was trying to explain to you surplus profit and also showing the social forces, classes. Something about the American people, they're wonderful, but they're kind of one dimension. They think that all you have to know is baseball and what kind of whiskey, what kind of car. They never talk about economics. They don't realize that there's a big crap game going on, and they control it. We are the players, we are the suckers. They run the ball game, they're the cutters, and they're the owners. And we're the players, always end up behind the 8 ball. We haven't got it. Until we become socially minded or we become worldview minded, then we can make some headway. Because in this period of history, we got 2 and 3 jobs. In the CIA, you only had 1 job, you made a living.
Stop. What are you trying to tell me?
Speeding. Mark it.
Take 4.
Mark it.
Take 4.
Okay, start.
1 meatball, thank you, brother. 1 meatball, have another. 1 meatball, thank you, brother. You gets no bread with 1 meatball. That's it.
Okay, that's it.
That's great.
This will be room tone for interview, and sound is